Retro computing and repairing treasures from our technology past, Neil from YouTube channel Retro Man Cave is here to share his experiences. All this and more on James Woodcock's Game and Gadget podcast. Hello and welcome to my Game and Gadget podcast. I'm James Woodcock and I realised just recently it has been over 5 years since I recorded a show. So with a fancy new microphone, mixer and the desire to interview fascinating individuals, today I am delighted to kickstart these efforts by talking to Neil from popular YouTube channel Retro Man Cave, which will soon pass over 100,000 subscribers due to his many videos covering retro computing repair and nostalgia. So, thanks for joining me today, Neil.
Hello, James. Oh, it sounds kind of scary when you say those numbers out loud. But thank you for having me. And I hope it helps in some small part to relaunch your show after your hiatus.
Thank you very much. Well, if I get anywhere close to 100,000, I'll be very impressed. So, what is the Retro Man Cave for those who haven't seen your channel?
Okay. So, the Retro Man Cave comprises of the Retro Man, that's me, and the cave, which is the space I work in. And I think sometimes actually the cave has a personality of its own. I think anyone could actually walk in sometimes and present from the cave, and it would support them just fine. So it comprises of me and the cave, and what I spend my days doing is tinkering with old computers and tech, like some kind of retro hermit. And I decided one day to film these tinkerings. This is going back to 2017. And as it happens, people enjoy watching it. So I kept on doing it, and it evolved into this YouTube channel that it is now, as you say, nearly 100,000 subscribers. We're at about 92,000 at the moment. And it's evolved into kind of a variety of formats, if you like, ranging from tutorials and restorations. I go on road trips to interesting places. I interview industry veterans, make the occasional documentary style video, all about computer history. And that's kind of what happens here. Anything and everything to do with retro.
So has it been a bumpy ride? So 2 years, you've had quite some time now to be dabbling, and to get to anywhere near 100,000 subscribers, plaudits to you. That's not an easy thing to achieve. So what was your prior experience to this? How did you sort of feel qualified to get into the YouTube realm?
Oh, I didn't feel qualified at all. And I certainly didn't, I didn't say, I'm going to be a YouTuber and set out to do it. I think I, like many other people, just turned the camera on one day and started chatting away, completely unscripted. The topic of the first video I put out was a flight simulator. I can't remember which one it was now, but I leave it on the channel, as I do with all my old videos, so that I quite like people to be able to look back and see that I've actually made some progress and the channel has evolved, rather than trying to cover up my past. But you will find older videos. You will find videos that go back to 2012, and this is quite a big regret of mine, is that I did register the channel in 2012, the name Retro Man Cave, on YouTube. And I did it for the sole purpose of I had to sell off my collection at the time. So I made videos that I then put the link to on my eBay listings to sell off my retro gear. But there was obviously a seed when I chose that name of maybe I could do something on YouTube, but I just didn't get around to it for another 5 years. And, you see these YouTubers who started, back in 2010, 2012, and, they're touching on 1 million subscribers. I'm not saying that would have happened, because it may have been a completely different channel if I didn't wait another 5 years for my own development, maturity, whatever, to change. But yeah, I do wonder sometimes, if I started in 2012 in earnest, where would we be now?
It's amazing how YouTube has progressed over the years, absolutely, and all credit to you. It's quite a crowded space, the retro area. There's lots of other channels there doing sort of similar things, but you've found your niche, you've found your audience, and it's 100,000. I can only see it going from strength to strength.
Here's hoping. Yeah. The charts are still on the up and up, so I'm hoping that we'll soon cross that 100,000 and it will keep going. And I take inspiration from the likes of people like obviously LGR and the 8-Bit Guy are two of the big dogs in the retro scene with over 1 million subscribers. So the audience is there; they've proven it. Hopefully, I'll be able to continue to grow in the way that they have. Yeah.
So the studio itself, you've actually had a newer space. I think it was it several months ago? You actually changed your cave location, so to be?
It was longer than that, actually. It was about a year ago. So the first videos I made were in the back bedroom of my flat, which incidentally was a basement flat, so it was very cave-like and underground. And then I found a local office for rent in the town where I live. And it was an office that nobody wants because it's, again, in the basement, so nice and cave-like. And so I moved here, must have been January 2018. Yeah, so it must be nearly 2 years I've been here, actually. Time flies. And it's the perfect space for me. I've set up, anyone who's seen the channel will recognise the Apple boxes that I have at the back of the set with RGB lighting. I've tried to give it a bit of personality and its own style. And it seems to work. Sorry, I'm just smashing my headphones against the microphone there. It seems to work. Yeah.
So obviously you've got almost like a studio set view where you're looking, you've got that fantastic backdrop with retro machines and titles on display. But if we were to have a sneaky peek and looked off-centre to the side, what is the surroundings?
It's one long room, and it has evolved in the space of time that I've been in this room. So when I first moved here, you would have come in and looked at it and you would have gone, this is a midlife crisis. This is a middle-aged man with just piles of retro stuff who doesn't know what to do with it. And over time, it's turned more into a studio, more into a working space so that I can actually be a bit more productive. So if you look around, I'm just looking at it now. If I look around from the set, at the other end of the room is my main computer where I sit and do all of my editing. So there's an editing corner. Off to one side is the lab, and sometimes I film facing the lab. So that's where I do the repairs with the nice ESD safe mat so that hopefully I don't zap any electronics. But it is quite a small room. Most people who come and visit comment how it looks bigger on TV. And lots of people do visit, by the way, which is nice. I've got quite an open door policy for most viewers who happen to be in the area. They'll pop in for a cup of coffee, which is really nice and a nice way to build the community.
So how often do you like to release videos? Do you have a kind of schedule you try and stick to?
I do. So Thursdays is the big video release day. So I try and do one a week. And then I also have what's called the Retro Tea Breaks, which is more of a podcast format, although I do film it. And that's where I interview people. And the purpose of that one on the Mondays was to try and just have a chat with someone and have a format that would be a lot quicker to edit and get out there. So I literally just record it and upload it. Whereas the Thursdays releases are a lot more what's the word? Cine something. Yeah, they've got a lot more flair, a lot more editing involved. I'm trying to say a word that I can't remember. What is the word, James? Help me out here.
I don't know. It sounds rather silly something.
There's more cinematography involved. Let's say that.
That sounds good. So, just out of personal curiosity, then, so when you're editing your videos, what actual software are you using for that?
So I'm using Premiere. I've got the whole Adobe CC collection.
Of course you have.
Legally, I might add.
Of course, absolutely. Me too.
And so I'm using Premiere to edit. I'm using Audition to do some of the audio editing. And Illustrator and Photoshop to knock up different illustrations that I need to use and animate. I don't actually dip into After Effects at all. That's like a whole beast unto itself, and I think I'd have to take some courses if I was ever to use that properly. I have opened it a few times and gone, oh, that looks a bit scary. And generally I don't need explosions and star fields and special effects in my videos, so I can manage with Premiere. Yeah.
Well, seeing you're dealing with some CRTs, and certainly when you're putting a screwdriver down behind them, you may get real explosions if you're very lucky.
Yeah, we don't need After Effects for that.
Exactly. Oh, the videos where I hear it go pop, and that's just what's being picked up on the mic, so I'm sure it sounds equally, if not more so, impressive in person. Wow, that freaks me out, and I'm miles and miles away in the safety and comfort of my own home. But I digress.
You get used to it.
I could only hope so. So, is there anyone actually involved with the production work? Because this is something you've just recently started doing as a full-time venture, but obviously your time is going to be quite limited at other times. Is there anyone who gives you any assistance in recording or editing, or is it just literally you?
Yeah, so as of this week, you just mentioned full-time. As of this week, I've gone full-time as a YouTuber. I've relinquished myself of my other job. Thank you. No, there is nobody else involved. It's just me here. So I do the research, write the script, set the cameras up, get the audio working, and I've had to learn a lot along the way. You know, I had no history of filmmaking. I was a terrible photographer, so I don't know how I've managed to make good videos. It just seems to work when I use a video camera compared to taking photographs for some reason. So it is just me, and then I sit down and make a big cup of coffee and edit it all together.
Well, I must admit, from my own personal experience, I've had no sort of formal training, and actually it was more out of fun and creating home videos that I got into it. So if I went on holiday, I'd splice scenes together, put in some background music, and that became a video I shared with family and maybe unlucky friends. And to sort of talk retro for a minute, so my first true video editing experience would have been on a Matrix Mystique graphics card.
Oh, nice.
And you could have brought an add-on for that particular graphics card, and it was just like a 2D graphics card with very, very, very basic sort of 3D acceleration. Certainly not in the 3DFX world. But you could buy an add-on for this card called the Rainbow Runner. Mm-hmm. And that would be a great hardware acceleration for a particular type of video format, which I believe was MJPEG. This is how far back we're going now. But certainly importing your tape video and then using MJPEG compression and then creating your edits of the video, it was, for the time anyway, it was accessible. And it came with all the video and sort of basic audio editing software, so you could dabble and experiment and actually create some fairly convincing output from it. And so that's how my sort of video editing background, and then using that, I started creating DVDs for Yamaha, for example. So flagship instruments they would create, I would help them, and I'd be actually producing their DVDs, and that just came from creating home videos. And I think we're very lucky that, particularly in the last 20 years or so, technology has certainly made it more accessible for almost anybody to get involved in something like this.
Oh, it has, yeah.
And if they've got the personality, and yourself has obviously got the personality to attract the people to subscribe to your channel, and you've got an interesting subject that you cover, that you have that ability and you're able to publish videos. YouTube are very lucky to have as a platform. So it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cinematic, that was the word I was trying to think of. But I mean, it's almost like I sometimes wish that I was 10 years older so that I was in the right place at the right time for the whole bedroom coding boom. I was a little bit too young to get on board with that, although I did dabble with BASIC. You know, I would have loved to have been a Darling brother or an Oliver twin. But I guess, you know, what you were saying about video editing is kind of the same thing. We were at the right place at the right time to get on board with digital video editing and analog back then as well, and be able to turn that into something. I don't go back as far as you with the video editing, probably Premiere version 4, something like that. And I used to make videos at work when I was an IT technician, to keep the IT manager happy. So once a year he would have to do his presentation to the big cheeses. So I'd help him knock something up to show all the stats from the help desk and things like that. So that's probably where I first started playing with Premiere, yeah.
So that's an interesting comment, actually. So if you think of, Worms, a game I still adore today, there's still iterations of Worms being appearing on many platforms. It's on the Switch, it's on the PC, it's on the Xbox, it's on your phone, it's everywhere. And there was originally a guy who did it, I believe, on an Amiga in his garage, and he struggled originally to, I think I'm reciting this right, to get a publisher, and then he got one in the end, and that's become a phenomenon that must have made quite a lot of money over the years.
I think it started out as a competition in Amiga format.
I
think that was Worms, yeah. And it may have been in Blitz Basic originally.
Oh, wow.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I think that's part of how it started. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, James.
No, that's absolutely fine. So, but maybe it's come sort of full circle now. So when we're talking about phones and app stores, that's probably made it a little bit more accessible if you are getting into development to at least create a very rudimentary basic game. And there's platforms like Unity on the PC, which you can, again, create some games based on that. So maybe it's become a little bit more accessible again, but there's certainly a lot of competition out there.
Yeah, there's always a problem that comes with the accessibility in games programming, which is you then end up with a lot of games that look the same, as opposed to if you're writing a game from the ground up. But yeah, if it can lead on to better things, it's always good to have a point of entry. For us, it was Basic. If for people now it's Unity, which is a very huge, complex beast. I haven't actually tried to program on Unity. Is it accessible? Can you just sit down and easily knock out a game without learning too much?
I am not, unfortunately, qualified to answer that.
Okay.
Maybe someone can contact us and let us know from their experience.
There are things like Fusion on the Switch, which is a new basic-based programming language for the Switch. But you are working from the same library of assets, so you're going to end up with a lot of similar-looking games. But that's not to say it's not a good place to learn the basics of programming, absolutely.
Yeah, but certainly going back and thinking the technology leaps that would have been made. So I think the jump from, say, 8-bit to 16-bit, 2D to 3D, there have been so many advances and how quickly sprites can move around on the screen, how many number of sprites, and factor in all these different things. It's probably easier to create something more unique than it is now.
Yeah, you'd have to do some pretty horrendous coding to cause slowdown with 2D sprites now.
But I'm still glad there's a place for 2D sprites. There's certainly been a resurgence over the last couple of years in particular where 2D seems to have made a return, and even 8-bit representation of games. You can buy an 8-bit style looking game for the most powerful console in the world. And I just find that fascinating and brilliant that we don't forget this style, that it is an art form among itself.
Absolutely. And doesn't it look better than PlayStation 1 era 3D?
It's definitely age better.
2D pixel art, it doesn't age, does it, compared to those early 3D ventures? So I'm all for it, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm still fascinated by classic point-and-click adventure games. So Simon the Sorcerer, Sam and Max, Day of the Tentacle, Broken Sword, the list goes on and on. I can still just sit at, say, an iPad and play Broken Sword on there, and it still looks great, the story's still engaging. But to go to then a PlayStation 1 game, it's much harder for me to sit down and go, yes, this is art. Oh, look at the texture warping. Oh dear, look at the basic pointy polygons. Although if you've seen Elon Musk's latest truck, they've just released in America, maybe it's all the fashion again, don't they?
Yeah, certainly a low polygon effort from Elon.
So prior to Retro Man Cave then, what was your occupation? How did you learn how to repair a machine?
Well, my profession, I guess, was I worked for 17 years in IT, starting off as a first-line support guy, going back to Windows NT4 days, this would have been in the late 90s. Worked my way up through the help desk, became a server engineer, network engineer, IT manager, IT director, all of that business. And then after 17 years, I got a bit burnt out, as a lot of people do in that industry. And I had another little job on the side that I'd been building up, which was in graphic design, and I'd built that up enough to support me to take a break from IT. That was only 3 or 4 years ago. So a lot of experience in IT, but that's not necessarily experience of taking machines apart and fixing them.
Indeed.
Yes, I did build PCs from scratch for as long as I can remember. But I didn't ever have to pick up a soldering iron on the help desk, that's for sure.
That was going to be my question. When on earth did they ask you to get out the soldering iron?
Yeah, it just doesn't, if I'd been in IT 20 years earlier, then yeah, sure, but it just didn't happen anymore. So that was very much just a hobby. It was born out of a love for retro computers. So in the late 90s, I was doing things like buying arcade machines when you could still get hold of them very easily because arcades still existed. I remember I picked up the Yellow Pages once, phoned an arcade and said, have you got any I can buy? They said, yeah, we've got a lockup full. You can have one for 50 quid. So took an arcade home. It was in a bad state. So that's the kind of projects that I'd pick up and fiddle with and learn things as I go. What did I do with that? I ended up putting a MAME PC in there, decasing the family CRT, the old telly from the lounge, and stuck that in there and figured out how to get it all working. But I'm certainly not, and I never pretend to be an electronics engineer. I'm very much a hobbyist and a problem solver. And I think that comes across in the channel. I think I'm a problem solver, and unless I truly understand what I've had to teach myself to fix the problem that's in front of me, then I don't try and teach it to other people. I see that as the measure of my understanding. So, for example, my most recent video, I replaced a flyback transformer on a CRT. So I went to a lot of effort to try and further my knowledge on, okay, exactly what is a flyback transformer? Why does it do this thing? Why have I got these symptoms? How is it related to that? And then I'll fix it, and then I'll explain it in layman's terms, because I'm not an electronics engineer, so I can't use all of the technical terms if I don't know them. And it seems to inspire people either to fix their own kit because they don't necessarily care about knowing what the electrons are doing at that level. They just want to know how to fix this broken thing. Or it inspires them to go on to more technical places and look up more and learn more, other YouTube channels, books, or whatever. So I get a lot of positive feedback for taking that approach from people who watch the channel, which is really nice. It's nice when you hear that you've inspired people.
Yeah, and to be fair to you, at the start of a video, you usually say you're basically following you on a journey as you explore and discover things along the way. You're not literally saying, okay, this is what you need to do. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3. It's literally, you're on a journey. We're joining you for that journey, and let's see what we found out along the way. And a lot of it also is, it's not been a smooth ride. This didn't work. I shut it up, and then this didn't work. And it's all these...
The recent Amiga video, I don't know if you saw that one. I was building a new Amiga, and there was one episode in particular where just thing after thing, the RAM broke, what else broke on it? All sorts broke on it. It was 2 lots of RAM actually that broke. A pin snapped off of my Vampire accelerator, and then the cream on the top was when I managed to put it all back together and boot it up. My Amiga booted as an Atari. Yeah. It booted as an Atari ST, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? After the day from hell trying to fix all this, it's just trolling me now. And it turned out that if you hold the fire button down on a joystick with a Amiga with a Vampire in, the Vampire, which is FPGA based, will go into Atari ST mode. And it just so happened I had a book or something sat on top of my joystick when I was turning it on.
But that are literally the day-to-day frustrations, isn't it? That we're sharing your pain as you go on this journey.
Yeah, it's all part of the story. And
exactly,
it's not a tutorial channel. Yes, you hopefully you'll learn skills as you go, but it's entertainment first and foremost. That's what I try and produce.
Absolutely. And I'm sure the community, there will be times where they say, oh, have you tried this, or have you considered this part? It may help with this, and hopefully getting some valuable feedback back from the videos as well for yourself.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the episodic nature of a lot of the series that I do. So because I have to, and I do have to produce a video once a week, because if you don't, the YouTube algorithms will just punish you. I have a limited amount of time to make a video. So if I want to do a big project, I'll break it down into 3 or 4 episodes. And usually I'll put out the first episode and immediately I'll get lots of feedback from people saying, have you seen this accelerator or this add-on, or, do you need this to help you with it? And by the end of the series, I've had really kind and generous donations from people, good advice, and it turns into a result that's a hell of a lot better than it would have been if the community wasn't involved, if it was just me saying, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. So it really is beneficial, yeah.
So what got you into this retro? What was your first gaming and computer experiences that got you hooked?
My very first computer was an Amstrad CPC 464. We're going back to 1985, I think that was. And I think my story is probably familiar to a lot of people. It was just the case that you sat down and suddenly you were controlling what was on the television, and you'd never done that before. It was that sense of control and wonder, and I had no idea how it was working. I was just a kid, but the possibilities seemed completely limitless. So I was hooked from day one. It was actually bought for me and my brother, and I think after 5 minutes he went off and played football. He wasn't interested at all. So it became my computer. And yeah, it just built ever since. Amstrad CPC, went to an Amiga 500 after that, and then over to the PC, as most people did in the 90s. And I've been a PC user ever since, until I started buying all the retro machines, I guess.
And gone full circle.
Yeah.
But now, no doubt, you're buying retro computers and machines that you didn't have at the time. You've just read more about them and gone, oh, I need this. I want to explore this. And on your channel, I want to open it up and explore this.
Yeah. Filling in the gaps, buying the machines that you wouldn't have had a hope in hell of being able to afford back in the day, although prices are creeping up again.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'm not responsible for that. But, things like, Amstrad Mega PCs, Sharp X68000. I didn't even know a Sharp 68000 existed in the 80s. This is an incredible powerhouse of a Japanese gaming desktop or tower. You can get it in two form factors. Machine. So many things. We're talking about over 40 years of consumer electronics and home computers to play with. I'm not in danger of running out of subject matter anytime soon, or computers to pick up. And as soon as I scratch the surface on something, I don't know, I covered the Thomson MO5, which is a French computer. All of a sudden, people start making suggestions. Well, have you seen the Alice, or have you seen this or that? There's a whole range of computers in every country you've never heard of. Russian or Soviet ZX Spectrum clones. There's millions of them. There's so much to explore. So, I'm really enjoying just every day is a day of discovery in retro computers. I love it.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember back in the day looking at something like the Mega PC, as you've already described. So that would be the one where it's half Sega Mega Drive and half PC. And what was the processor in that one? Was it a 486 or 386?
That was a 386SX. And there was a 486 version. I'm not sure that ever made it to market. So it was based on a standard Amstrad, like a slimline desktop PC that they did. And then they shoved a card into it to make it Mega Drive compatible and a cartridge slot at the front. So because of that Amstrad standard form factor, I guess, there is a 486 PC out there by Amstrad that you can take the motherboard out of and put into a Mega PC to make it a 486. But as standard, it's a 386.
And that is the perfect example of, I remember that back in the day, seeing it brand new and thinking, oh, I would so want one of those. But the price was ridiculous. And I don't think even at the time a 386 was particularly fast.
No, it was a little bit long in the tooth even by the time it came out. You were paying £1,000 for a Mega Drive and a slow PC. Just go out and buy a Mega Drive, mate.
I know, but it was just like the fascination of a Mega Drive in a PC. How is this even possible? It's just wizardry. It's sorcery. How can this be happening? But yeah, I was very attracted to that at the time. But as you say, completely out of my price range for when you were a youngster.
Yeah.
But the one thing I didn't even realise existed, that Laserdisc in Mega Drive?
Oh, yeah, the Pioneer Laser Active. That's a beast of a machine. So that was sold in Japan only. And that's a huge Laserdisc player and it's not just Mega Drive. It's got a big hole in the front with an eject button, and you can put whole systems into there. So there's a Mega Drive module that you slide in there, and it's a Mega Drive and a Mega CD. There's a PC Engine module that you put in there, so suddenly it's a PC Engine, and a karaoke module, and because it's Japanese, of course they've got karaoke.
Absolutely.
And all these other things. And then, unlike the Mega PC, which is two separate systems in one box, there's no integration between the PC and the Mega Drive. On the Laser Active, they then brought out Laserdisc-based Mega Drive games. So there's this really rare, I can't even remember how there are. It's probably like 15 or 16 Mega Drive games on Laserdisc and PC Engine as well. I'm not saying they're any good, but they're fascinating to explore. Yeah,
absolutely. And for hopefully everyone who's listening to this has seen a Laserdisc or at least seen one online. But these are just gigantic CDs, really. And I own an actual Laserdisc. Don't have a player. I just wanted the novelty of actually being able to hold a Laserdisc. But they are such massive things.
I guess the most famous Laserdisc game is Dragon's Lair, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I'd love to get hold of a Dragon's Lair machine.
Oh, there we go. We'll keep our eyes out for that one. But I think, as you can tell, I've been watching your videos to be able to pick out all of these for you on this podcast.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
I was watching one, and I actually watched it for the second time because it was a computer that's very dear to my heart. So in the past, I owned an Acorn Archimedes A3010.
Mm-hmm.
So while everybody else had their Amigas and their Atari STs, I was like the weird kid who had the Acorn Archimedes A3010.
I didn't like to say, yeah.
So, to be fair, it was an awesome machine. It didn't have a huge amount of software support, but there were some great key titles on there. So it came with Zool, for example, and obviously Zool was on various platforms, but it seemed to run absolutely fine and look absolutely fine on the Acorn. But I think what drew me in at the time was the operating system seemed quite ahead of its time. It seemed very stable. It has a lot of the nice windowing that we all see today and just take for granted. But the bit I loved the most, and you did the Risk PC video, was the ARM processor. So just want to give a little bit of background. I don't want to spoil your moment. You just tell us about ARM, because this machine, when I was ridiculed for my Acorn Archimedes, has somehow taken over the world.
Yeah, so ARM processors go all the way back to Acorn in the early 80s. So they developed a processor, and they tested it on the BBC Micro's tube port. So they created this new processor, tested it on the tube port, and it's what's known as a RISC or reduced instruction set CPU. I think that's what it is.
Computing.
Thank you for correcting me. Sorry. As opposed to CISC, which is the complex instruction sets that you get in the Intel CPUs. So it's a slightly different approach to how you instruct these processors. And the wonderful thing about them is that they used very little power compared to the CISC CPUs, which is why over the years it's evolved into the perfect CPU for tablets and for telephones, and it's in every device you can think of. But before it got into mobile phones and tablets, it was known as, was it ARM at this point? I think it was ARM, but the A stood for Acorn for a long time before it changed. Anyway, it went into the Archimedes range of computers. So you had the BBC Micro, then you had the BBC Master and the Master Compact, and then Acorn moved on to the Archimedes range, and it was all based on their RISC CPUs. And it was powerful, I'd say low-powered, but powerful CPU. Before we had 3D accelerations as standard in our machines, I remember seeing things like E-Type JAG and Chocks Away, and all of these Star Glider, all of these 3D games running on Archimedes, Conqueror and Zarch, and they just flew. The frame rate was incredible. My Amiga 500 couldn't keep pace. It was just the fact that I had a much bigger library of games on my Amiga 500 that kept me interested, but I was slightly envious of the one weird kid that we had that owned an Acorn Archimedes on our estate when I used to go around and play on that. So, yeah, it's a machine that even if it wasn't the most successful machine, it's probably had the most successful legacy of all retro computers in that ARM processor, for sure.
thank you for making me feel a little bit better. In fact, I need to dig it out of the garage and make sure it still works. There's a little... I need to dive into my cave and see how that's still going. But anyway, moving on. So, for anyone wishing to learn how to repair older systems, is there any recommendations you would suggest? Obviously, they can get the enthusiasm and get some of your journey experiences by watching your channel. But what do you think the next logical step would be so they could actually dabble themselves?
Well, YouTube is a fantastic resource for picking up new skills. Not just me, but there's loads of channels out there that can help you to pick up the basics. But my advice would be to buy yourself a soldering iron, get yourself a broken bit of electronics, and just first and foremost get handy with the soldering iron. Learn how to remove components, how to add components. Just get a feel for how does it react? How do the pads on the board react if you haven't got enough heat? If you've got too much heat, what does flux do to help you? How do you use desoldering braid to remove things? Just play around, because I'm very hands-on. I basically learn from breaking things. That's how I learn. I don't learn from... It feels too much like school to pick up a book and start reading, the fundamentals of electronics before you even get your hands dirty. So I would say pick up a soldering iron, learn how to use it, and then when you're starting to feel a bit more confident and you've got that nice feedback of feeling like you've learnt something, then pick up a book and then go, okay, so what's this funny looking component and what does that do? But the beauty of, if you're doing it for the purpose of fixing retro computers, the beauty of that is they've been around for 30 or 40 years. It's very well known what a lot of the common problems are with them. So as long as you know how to use a soldering iron and you can see what the symptom is of your problem, I don't know, there's a squeal from the monitor or whatever it is, it's highly likely that you'll find on a forum somebody who's describing your problem perfectly and what the fix is. So say replace capacitor C25. As long as you know how to use a soldering iron and you're confident that you're working safely, you're not going to zap yourself. Avoid monitors to start with. But then you've got the skills to do that. You don't yet know why it's fixing it, but you've achieved your objective of fixing your original ZX Spectrum or whatever it was. And then you can continue your journey to learn about why it fixed it. But you get the satisfaction of having fixed something. So start with a soldering iron, absolutely.
So what are the common things that appear a lot as problematic areas in computing? From watching your videos, a lot of it seems to be leaky batteries, which can be devastating, or not so bad if you catch it in time, or capacitors. And
it's a pain because capacitors are at an age in these machines where they're all leaking. There are different periods of time, like in the early 2000s, where there was lots of really quite poor quality surface mount capacitors, so they're all leaking. There's a period in the 90s, like with the Amiga 600 and Amiga 1200. There's a period there where their capacitors are really bad. But then you might have a BBC Micro from 1981, which is working perfectly fine. But you would still want to change the capacitors on a machine that old. But the problem for me is, because pretty much everything has bad capacitors that I touch around here, the last thing I want to do is put out a video week after week that is, let's change the capacitors, because people will get bored of that pretty quickly. But it is the main problem. If you're fixing machines, that is the number one thing you're going to come up against, is dodgy capacitors. Absolutely.
And it certainly appears you need to be, well, at least what's the word I'm looking for? Have the patience of a saint. That's the term.
You do need patience, yeah.
Particularly with capacitors, because some of them have a lot.
Yeah, like the Pioneer Laser Active. There were, I don't know, there must have been about 200 capacitors that we had to change on that thing. That took a couple of days. But others are not so bad. Amstrad CPC, that's got about 2 through-hole capacitors on the main board, and they rarely break. So it depends what you're working on. A Mega Drive, that's got way more than you would think looking at it from the outside. But yeah, get used to capacitors and changing capacitors if you're working on retro kit for sure.
So how easy is it to find the parts for the capacitors, the batteries, and any other bits and bobs you may need?
That's not too much of a problem. You've got places like CPC and RS Components. You can find pretty much anything you need. Some of the bigger capacitors get a little bit pricey. So it depends how much you value that piece of retro kit that you're trying to fix. But you can get hold of most things without a problem. Yeah.
Has there been a bodge you've had to do because you haven't been able to get a part that you're particularly proud of?
Not really. Sometimes I have to bodge together a couple of resistors to get the resistance I need just because I haven't got the right part in stock. But yeah, no, I can't think. I've got usually a couple of videos on the go. So if I really need something, I can afford a little bit of time to order it and get it in. So yeah, and because I'm making videos, there's nowhere to hide. If I bodge something, someone will spot it and they will call me out on it. So it's just not worth it.
And the more subscribers you get, the more people who can comment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what have been your favourite moments on Retro Man Cave so far?
Favourite moments. You mentioned the laser active. I really enjoyed that because I worked a lot with a chap called Mark from Mark Fixes Stuff, another great YouTube channel on that one. And I really do enjoy collaborating with people. So that was nice. I think one of the things that it's really afforded for me is that it's opened doors. So I mentioned the Monday videos I do sometimes called Retro Tea Breaks. There's not a chance in hell that Al Lowe from Sierra or David Fox or who else have I spoken to? The Oliver twins. There's no way they would have entertained speaking to me unless they saw, here's a guy with an audience and they can hear our story. So I think the favourite thing that's come out of it for me is the fact that I've been able to talk to my heroes, been able to talk to these legends and they say yes when I ask them. And hopefully that will continue.
I'm sure it will.
Rob Hubbard. I spoke to Rob Hubbard the other day. It was amazing.
Well, why was it amazing?
Because it's Rob Hubbard. Because it's Rob Hubbard.
Was there any revelations? I mean, what came out of it? Come on.
There's no revelations. No, it's just nice to speak to the man himself, Okay, here's a revelation. He did reveal that he would often make a C64 track for a game. He'd make the music for it. And then it was his wife who would port it to the Amstrad or the ZX Spectrum. She'd do that version. It wasn't him.
Wow, there you go. There was a revelation.
Yeah, there you go.
So, what are the classic games that live in your memory? If you were going to select a few, what would it be, do you think?
So, just thinking about when I go to expos, the two arcade cabinets I always make a beeline for are Robotron. Love that game. It's the Williams game. I think it's 1982. That for me is the perfect arcade experience. It sucks you in. You're fully immersed when you're playing that. You've got to play it with two joysticks. If you haven't played it and you've played Smash TV, that's like an evolution of Robotron. That kind of intense arcade shooter. And I'm not a fan of shooters really in arcades, but Robotron, it's a genre all of its own. I love it. And Outrun, just because Outrun makes you feel cool as hell when you play it in a sit-down arcade, the full-size sit-down Outrun cabinet. It's the coolest game around. I mentioned Dragon's Lair earlier. I don't know why I like Dragon's Lair. It's crap. It is.
It sucks your money.
The game is awful. There is no gameplay whatsoever, but I love playing it. As you say, especially now you can play it on free play.
Which is certainly advantageous.
Yeah. And then on the home computers, I make no disguise of the fact that I'm a complete nerd and love flight simulators. And I love the Ultima series of role-playing games. Between Flight Sims and Ultima, they've taken hours of my life away. Hundreds of hours of my life.
So, do you have much time to enjoy the technology around you? So you stream often live on Twitch of your gameplays and you're talking to people as they're commenting within Twitch. That's always nice to see. But other than that, if you weren't broadcasting, do you actually get the time to sit down with one of your beloved retro machines and think, I just want to play this? It has nothing to do with the video. I just want to play this game and this bit of hardware.
No, it's the most frustrating part of YouTubing you can imagine. If you want to use and play retro games, don't become a YouTuber, because you'll spend a week fixing a bit of kit and you'll go, brilliant, it's the most perfect example of an Amstrad CPC in the country right now. It's mint, it's perfect. But I've got to put it away now because I've got to start work on my next video. It's so annoying. So that's kind of why I started Twitch streaming a little bit more, because it gives me, reason to keep it out, to plug it in and create entertainment and content and keep the viewers happy while actually getting to play on this kit. And something that has helped recently to allow me to play and explore a few more systems and games is the Mister, which is an FPGA-based device, which has cores for loads of systems, and it runs them really authentically. So it's FPGA-based. I'm going to say emulation, but people will kill me for using the word emulation.
Absolutely.
But you know what I mean. And it's really convenient to pick up and fire up a system and play on. So, I don't get nearly enough time.
So how do you feel about modern technologies, so game consoles and smart home technologies and Philips Hue light bulbs? Does any of that interest you?
The consoles do. I mean, the nice thing about what I do is it means I'm so many generations behind the current gen that when I do sit down on a modern console, I am wowed. Because, I've just spent the week playing on a BBC Micro, and now here's a PlayStation 4 that's just absolutely mind-blowing. So, that's an advantage of playing with retro tech. But outside of that, no, I'm not paranoid, but I'm not a fan of inviting tech into my home that's, always listening with the objective to target me as a consumer. So I try to avoid the listening devices. I spoke to my energy company recently. They were trying to push me to get a smart meter. And I said, well, what happens when I move to the next provider? Can I take it with me? No, it becomes a dumb meter there. So, there's no standards for those devices. So I'm absolutely not an early adopter. I tend to let other people iron out all the problems. And then when it's a couple of generations in, I'll probably get on board, But no, I'm a bit of a Luddite in that respect.
Well, I'll be the weird kid. I'll be the one experimenting then.
Yeah.
And taking all the pain initially. And I'm sure in 20 years you'll be working on repairing an Xbox One X.
There you go. You pay £500 for this bit of kit, and then in a few years I'll pay a tenner for it, and all the problems will be gone. And that's it. That's how it works. So thank you to all the guinea pigs out there who are on the cutting edge.
But I guess the biggest problem, when you look at retro gaming in particular, you'd buy the floppy disk, you'd buy the cassettes, the cartridges, but more and more of that's becoming digital. So even if you had the physical copy of the disc, potentially in 20 years' time, that would have had a patch related to it or some online multiplayer, and this is bits we're most likely going to miss out on, and unless you experienced it at the time, unless there was someone recording a video of it at the time, it's going to be very hard to sort of re-experience that moment in time.
Yeah. And with the modern consoles, how are future retro content creators going to play these games when they're completely reliant on online services? I'm sure the very biggest games, people will take the time to reverse engineer a server to keep it going or something like that. But so much will become inaccessible, completely inaccessible. And as you say, if they don't record it now, how are we going to see that? So there are going to be some interesting times in another 20 years or so, for sure.
So what are your future plans for Retro Man Cave?
Well, as I said, full-time as of this week, so I'm just letting the dust settle on that. The goal is not to create more content, it's to kind of up the quality rather than put the pressure on myself to release lots more videos. So I've just before we started talking, I've just finished the first video, which is the start of a series on the BBC Micro. So I've spent every hour this week of my full-time hours working on that video, and hopefully the quality will show when it comes out. It'll come out to patrons next week. Hopefully, improved the lighting. I've been using a green screen for the first time. I've updated the captions so they look a bit nicer. So hopefully this extra time I've got will create better quality videos. But other than that, more of the same. I'd be lying if I didn't say at the moment I am feeling a little bit of a weight of expectation on my shoulders because I've announced to the world I'm full-time. And it's like, okay, what are they expecting to see as a result of that? Hopefully what I've produced this week and the bump up in quality will satisfy that. But we'll see. And I think once that feeling has passed, I'll reassess what else I can do. But more of the same. More videos, more retro tech. I've got a huge pile of machines that need to be looked at. I'm never going to run out of machines to fix, so I'll just keep ploughing on through them, James.
Well, I'm sure in a few months' time we'll have some explosions from After Effects. And it'll all been worthwhile.
I'll do it just for you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Neil. I'm sure everyone's enjoyed listening. So where can we find out more?
The main place is youtube.com/retromancave. If you want to interact with me, then Discord's brilliant. There's lots of people chatting. I've got a screen dedicated to Discord where I just chat to people all day long while I'm working. Twitter, Facebook, all of the links. If you just open any video of mine on YouTube, look in the video description, you'll find all the links, or just search for Retro Man Cave and you'll find me.